Hey everybody, welcome back to 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. I am here, super cozy and comfy in my chair with my basically a detective sweatshirt from the 10 to Life merch shop, and I am ready to talk with you about another true crime case. Now, I don't know, I'm having another, I'm looking in the screen right now, another weird hair day today. I can't figure out what I'm doing with it. It's just air dried. So it's a little wild today, but we're all just going to roll with it, okay? Today's case that we're talking about is one, I don't want to say it's taboo, but it does kind of touch on some subjects about open marriage, about what happens when you do open up the marriage and things like that. So as we all can probably agree, marriage is absolutely a wonderful thing, and you have to decide what the best thing is for your marriage. And maybe the best thing to do is open up your marriage to other people. Maybe that's for some people. While this might add some excitement for some, for others it is a recipe for disaster. I know for me it would be, because I am jealous and I'm not able to do all of that. I'm not able to separate my feelings, but jealousy and emotional affairs are just some of the things that can pop up for things like this. And in today's case, the couple that we're talking about fell right into those issues, as well as many, many more. So this case deals with a slew of lies, religion, cheating, love triangles, and so much more. So without further ado, grab a cup of coffee, grab your cocktail, grab your froyo, grab whatever you want to grab, and let's get right into it. In 2014, 35-year-old Sabrina and 38-year-old Robert Limon were considered the it couple of their very picturesque town. Everyone who knew them from the outside really, truly envied them. They had what so many people dream of having. They had children, a cute home, and, seemingly, a stable marriage. The couple was really beloved by everybody for their kind and caring nature towards everybody that they knew. Now, Sabrina and Rob had a bit of a whirlwind romance, you could say. Before their life together in Silver Lakes, California, they actually met in 1998 at a barbecue through mutual friends in Prescott, Arizona, and that's where they were both living at the time. And Rob was born in Arizona, whereas Sabrina was born and raised in California. Both of them had pretty normal childhoods, too, with nothing out of the ordinary. Rob came from a bigger family and was really close with his sisters, and Sabrina came from a smaller family, but she was also really close to her sister. Sabrina never finished high school, but she did go on to work in a daycare. And when they met, Sabrina was 18 years old, and Rob was 21 years old, and the two of them instantly became inseparable. They were moving in together right away, they were engaged shortly after. I mean, like I said, it was kind of a whirlwind romance. Their engagement was also fairly short, and on August 19th, 2000, they got married. Both of their families really loved the idea of Rob and Sabrina being together, and they approved of the marriage, and they were really excited about it. Then, in 2001, shortly after getting married, due to Sabrina's family getting Rob a mechanic job at the BNSF rail yard, the two of them moved to Silver Lakes, onto a very picturesque street called Strawberry Lane. Now, Silver Lakes, also known as Hellendale, is a pretty small town with a population of about 6,000 people. It's located in the Mojave Desert in San Bernardino County, and it's right off the famous and very historical Route 66. Now, Silver Lakes is a pretty quiet residential community where people typically have to commute in and out of town just to get to work. And while the town has a little bit of crime, it typically is more so driven with small town gossip rather than being a dangerous community. But all in all, Silver Lakes seems to be a pretty great and almost resort-like type of town because it sits between these two man-made lakes that are often used for swimming, for boating, things like that. So it's safe to say that Sabrina and Rob loved where they lived, absolutely. They had a ton of friends in the community, and they enjoyed how close they were to so many amenities nearby, such as the golfing, the swimming, the boating, things like that. A few years after Sabrina and Rob got married, the couple welcomed their first child, Robert Jr., who went by Robbie for short. And then a few years later after that, they welcomed a baby girl named Leanna. Although Rob had heavily considered becoming a firefighter or possibly a Marine after high school, like I said earlier, he married Sabrina, and then her family got him a pretty good job actually as a mechanic for for the BNSF rail yard, which was located an hour and a half away from his home. But like I said, everybody who lived in Silver Lakes for the most part pretty much commuted in and out because it was such a small town and kind of isolated off the beaten path. So Rob stayed with the company, eventually becoming one of their first responders a couple of days a month on top of his mechanic job there. He worked really long 12-hour days and these 12-hour shifts, and most people who would work that long and work those shifts would just stay somewhere local so that they didn't have to drive a long distance home. But Rob wasn't that person. It didn't matter how many days in a row he was working, what kind of shifts he was working, he always made it home at night to tuck his kids into bed. His kids meant the absolute world to him, and he wasn't going to miss out on any time with them. That's just how Rob was, and his motto was family first, always. So in 2008, things seemed to be getting a bit stagnant for Sabrina and Rob. Call it the 7-year itch, which technically I guess it's 8 years now, but they kind of were hitting a little bit of a lull, a rough patch. They had 2 young children who were eating up a lot of their attention, and Rob was working these really long days. So their relationship needed some type of change, so they decided to try out having an open marriage. And it would appear that Rob was more the initiator behind this idea, but either way, Sabrina was happy to go along with the plan. The first couple that they did this with were their friends Dale and Nicole Smith. Dale and Nicole had also been having some marital problems for quite a while, and that's why they decided to open up their marriage, just like Sabrina and Rob. But over time, Dale and Sabrina started to form a very strong emotional bond that ended up being a lot more about the mental connection than the physical one. Dale also began heavily relying on Sabrina for someone to talk to about his marital problems, and Rob didn't like how close Sabrina was getting with Dale. The physical aspect of their open marriage was one thing, but he didn't want her having an emotional affair as well. But the thing was that was what Sabrina wanted all along from Rob. She wanted a strong emotional connection, and since she wasn't getting that from him, she was really happy to be having it with Dale. Now, Rob didn't see that, and he told her that she needed to just stop talking with him altogether. So Sabrina, being his wife, respected his wishes, and she stepped back. And at that point, Rob and Dale actually had a falling out, and the friendship was pretty much over. However, all that wasn't enough for Rob to call the whole open marriage thing off completely. Instead, it was actually quite the opposite, and things continued full force. Sabrina and Rob would go on adult-only vacations, if you know what I mean, where the pineapple's outside of the room. They also partied quite a bit, particularly on their boat at North Lake, which was right in town. And typically it appeared that the arrangement that they had was that they would swing with other people, but they would stay in the same room together and not go off separately. But with one couple that they had relations with often, which were their best friends, Jason and Kelly, that wasn't the case. At least it wasn't the case for Rob. Apparently he and Kelly started to take things private. But apparently it wasn't all that private, because he would come home from their get-togethers, their meetups, and he would brag to his wife Sabrina about all of the crazy stuff that Kelly did to him, which began to take a toll on Sabrina. And things seemingly didn't get any better. All along, Sabrina had wanted things to get better for her marriage, right? Thinking that by opening it up, that would solve their problems. But once the initial thrill wore off for her and she saw that Rob wasn't providing what she needed emotionally, she started getting really depressed, and she felt more alone than ever. Her sister Julie even used the word numb to describe how Sabrina was acting at that point, heavily relying on alcohol to forget about the state of her marriage. And at one point she decided that she had had enough with this open marriage and that she wanted to get back to normal. So she went to her husband Rob and she talked to him, saying she thought that they should stop having an open marriage and that they should get back to church. But Rob did not want to stop. He was happy with how things were going. He loved the party lifestyle, and he loved the overall variety of having an open marriage and what that allowed him. So this went on for years. When their kids went back to school in August of 2012, Sabrina decided to take a part-time job at Costco in the neighboring town of Victorville. This was about 20 minutes away. She figured that it would be a great way to take her mind off her marriage troubles, kind of the declining state of her marriage as well. And at Costco, she was responsible for setting up the demo sample tables, passing out the free samples, which, let me just say, you are a hero, Sabrina, for doing that. I love my Costco samples. And she really just loved working there. It allowed for her to not only get her mind off of Rob, but for her to also get out of the house and be social. And it was also there that a week or so later, she met 22-year-old Jonathan Hearn. Now, Jonathan didn't work there. He didn't work at Costco, but he was a regular because part of his job as a paramedic at the San Bernardino Fire Department was to do all of the grocery shopping for the department. So Sabrina, being the bubbly person she was, talked to everyone like she knew them, and Jonathan was no exception. The two of them struck up a conversation about how he worked at the fire department, which then led to Sabrina saying that she knew a local fireman, who was actually her and Rob's best friend Jason. And Jonathan told her he knew Jason too, and now the two of them had this common thread, so it really allowed for a good rapport to start forming for Jonathan and Sabrina. And then from then on out, by the third time that Jonathan shopped at Costco, Sabrina started calling him by name. And while it felt a little awkward because he didn't remember her name at first, he also felt pretty good about himself because this pretty, beautiful woman had remembered him, was calling him by name, and this connection was beginning to build. So that led him to feeling comfortable enough to ask for Sabrina's phone number. And to Jonathan's credit, he actually had no idea that she was married. I mean, she wasn't wearing a wedding ring, she had never talked about having a husband at this point, and he took her outgoing personality and their kind of back and forth banter as flirting. So he figured, hey, why not shoot my shot, Which I feel like any man would in that position. Not to mention, he's getting the free samples, right? So believe it or not, when he asked for her number, she gave it to him, and the two of them began texting frequently. They talked a lot about religion, and Sabrina loved getting guidance from him. They weren't exactly dating by any means, but things were heading that way, especially in Jonathan's eyes. Sabrina was pretty much the first woman to ever show interest in him. He had this very extremely religious and shielded upbringing, and that also included being homeschooled through a program at Arrow Christian Academy in Hesperia, California. And his dad even worked at the school. So he was kind of always on his own, and this was something that was very new for him. After high school graduation is when he went right into the paramedic field, and he didn't really find much time to date or meet people. And on the rare occurrence when he did meet a girl and he liked her and he gave her her phone number, things apparently never really seemed to pan out. So now having Sabrina show interest in him, it was a big deal. And it was also evident to her that he was catching some pretty strong feelings. So because of that, she wanted to do things right, and she figured that it was time to really drop the flirtatious act and let Jonathan know the truth about her before he became more attached, before it ended in some sort of heartbreak or discomfort. So she called him, and she told him that she wasn't single, and that she was actually a married housewife, she had a husband, and she had to try to let him down softly. Jonathan was devastated, and he was also completely caught off guard by this. He even said to Sabrina that he wouldn't have continued pursuing her had he known that she was married, but that he figured that she was single because she wasn't wearing a wedding ring, which again, that is understandable, right? But get this, she told him that she takes her ring off before she starts her shift due to her line of work. So after all of this comes to light, Jonathan wasn't cool with the idea of continuing whatever you would call what they had going on, whatever this relationship was or situationship, and he also wasn't comfortable with having any sort of romantic relationship with her as well, not with somebody who was married. But neither Jonathan or Sabrina wanted to cut things off completely, so they figured from there on out that they could just be friends. But let's be honest, what does a 30-something-year-old housewife and mother of two have in common with a single guy in his early 20s who's partying and hanging out with girls for the first time? And if you were thinking, yeah, that arrangement can't last long, you guessed right, because things got very, very messy, and it wasn't long until the two of them were in a secret relationship. Now, at this point, you're in the 2000s, but you're not early enough to when smartphones don't exist. But Sabrina would send printed photos of herself in lingerie along with letters to Jonathan. And she would talk about how important he was to her and how much she loved having him in her life. And Jonathan really loved this attention. Now, again, I don't know why you were printing out these Kodak pictures when you could just send it. Maybe she didn't want it to be traced back to her. Who knows? Maybe she thought it was romantic. But she would send these love letters to him and then include photos of her to the nines in lingerie. As he's receiving these lovey-dovey letters and sexual pictures, he would always tell her that he would never treat her the way that her husband was treating her, and how if they were together, it would be just them. It would be just them in a relationship. They wouldn't need to open it up, and all of his focus would be on her. So Jonathan was basically giving Sabrina the emotional connection that she was longing for from her husband, Rob. Jonathan was in love with Sabrina at this point, but she didn't want to go public, and she worked very hard to maintain the image of a perfect family life to the community of Silver Lakes. So Jonathan was kept a secret, which then, of course, in turn, didn't sit right with him. And by November of 2012, Jonathan was not feeling great about being with a married woman. And at this point, not only did it go against his religious and his moral beliefs, but he wanted a future that involved marriage, involved kids, which would have been impossible to have with Sabrina if it continued on this way. And at this point, all they had done was kiss, so he figured that a clean break would be easy enough, right? But Sabrina wanted to continue to be in Jonathan's life, even if it was just as friends. So that's what they decided to do at this point, just be friends again. But by the following month, once again, the two of them were in a full-fledged secret affair. And oddly enough, Sabrina at one point invited Jonathan on a night out in March of 2013 with her husband and with friends so that they could go see a coworker play some music at a local restaurant. Sabrina was hugging Jonathan in one picture, and there was even a group photo with Rob on one end and Jonathan on the other. Talk about awkward. Now at that point, Rob had no idea of what was going on, and he must have not thought much about it either, or about how Sabrina was acting around Jonathan, due to her already having this overly bubbly and social kind of personality with everyone anyway, so there weren't any red flags going up for him. But as the months went on, Jonathan's guilt grew bigger and bigger, until eventually he decided it was time to come clean and tell Rob. At least tell him to some degree. Knowing that he would never get Rob's phone number from Sabrina, he got in touch with Jason, that mutual contact that he had with Sabrina, and he tried to use Jason to get a hold of Rob. But Jason knew that something was up right away, so he came right out and asked Jonathan if he was messing around with Sabrina, which is kind of odd if that's right where his mind went to. Maybe he was already suspecting something, I don't know. But I suppose that Jason would know better than anyone the state of Sabrina and Rob's marriage. So when Jason asked Jonathan about what was going on, he lied, and he said nothing like that was going on, nothing like that at all with her, but that he just wanted to get in touch with Rob. So Jason said he wasn't going to give out Rob's personal information, but that he would share Jonathan's number with him, and if Rob wanted to call, it was up to him. Now, evidently, Rob did know for quite some time about Sabrina and Jonathan's secret affair, and I say secret loosely because apparently he knew, which could also be why Jason was acting so weird about giving out Rob's number and confronting Jonathan about Sabrina, since he was Rob's best friend. Apparently, Rob had gone through Sabrina's phone at some point and saw some pretty flirty text messages that made it pretty clear that the two of them were having an affair. So then one day that spring, while Rob was at Jason's house with Sabrina, he decided to call up Jonathan. And unbeknownst to Jonathan, Rob put that call on speakerphone, and he got down to the bottom of things once and for all. Jonathan stayed pretty calm and pretty collected on this call and told Rob that he and Sabrina had an emotional affair, but he left out the physical aspect of it entirely. But he was very apologetic about disrespecting Rob and Sabrina's marriage and for hitting on her. After their phone call ended, Rob was very angry and he was really pissed off about what his wife had been up to, and he even went as far as to break Sabrina's phone. But Sabrina was really remorseful for her actions, and she pleaded with Rob that she would stop seeing Jonathan. She just wanted to make her marriage work. She was so incredibly sorry. And she did stop seeing Jonathan, for a while at least. When she realized that nothing in her marriage had changed for the better, she went crawling back to Jonathan, and she was once again complaining about how Rob was not interested in fixing their marriage and how he prioritized everything else in his life over his kids and over her, and that basically he was selfish. She told Jonathan that Rob didn't care about passing her off to other men, so she figured that seeing Jonathan should be okay due to her imploding marriage and seemingly uninterested husband. So Sabrina and Jonathan continued their romantic affair for months. And by Valentine's Day of 2014, things were so serious that they both agreed that the next step was going to be marriage. So on arguably the most romantic day of the year, the couple was planning their future. But of course, the elephant in the room was that she was already married, and that didn't appear to be changing anytime soon either. So what were they going to do? How were they going to make this work? Sabrina seemed to be against getting a divorce, so she and Jonathan just had to keep their relationship and their plans private. Their affair continued for months, through the spring, through the summer, and they just continued to keep it private. Planning for a future, but not making any actionable moves towards a future, maybe just playing pretend in their mind, I don't know. So on the evening of Sunday, August 17th, 2014, Sabrina and Rob's daughter, Leanna, was very upset because Rob hadn't come home yet from work, and she really wanted to give him a hug and a kiss before she went to bed, because the following day was going to be her first day back at school. And it was really unlike Rob not to be back in time for Robbie Jr. and Leanna's bedtime. Like I said earlier, he always made it home, no matter what, no matter how tired he was from work. He was never going to miss out on seeing his kids. Sabrina was also worried that Rob wasn't home, and because he wasn't answering her phone calls or her text messages. She even texted her sister Julie saying that she was anxious about Rob. But Julie told her everything was probably fine, and that he just most likely got caught up in something and that he would be back soon. But he didn't come home. That same evening, around 7 p.m. at Rob's work, one of his coworkers came in for the night shift. When they got there, though, things were very, very wrong. There was broken glass on the floor, the refrigerator was left hanging open, and when they started looking into it further, they found something outside that would completely shock them. Outside, leaning against a truck, surrounded by a ton of blood, was a lifeless Rob. He had been shot several times, one shot being to the head and once to the chest. The coworker who found Rob immediately called 911, and the operator directed him to perform CPR on Rob. But when the guy started performing chest compressions, blood started coming out of Rob's mouth. It was clear that Rob was dead, and so the 911 operator told the man to leave him alone and to wait for the police to show up. But the question was, who shot and killed Rob? There wasn't a ton of evidence at the scene of any sort of crime, but there was a surveillance camera that was pointing to the road outside and to the building, and it showed the complete road and it showed everyone who drove past that day. So authorities started combing through the footage to see if anyone or anything appeared suspicious. There was also a surveillance camera pointed into the BNSF yard, and that did show someone walking through the area. And that person wasn't Rob. The video was not very clear at all, but the person did appear to walk with a limp. Rob's office had also been rummaged through, pretty messy, but officers were unable to pick up any forensic evidence. Police also got a hold of surveillance footage from a gas station close to where Rob worked, and it showed someone getting something to drink who was wearing a motorcycle helmet, a red bandana, and black gloves, and this was not long after the murder. There was also footage recovered that showed the person driving away with their motorcycle. So in the meantime, Sabrina was called into the police department to be questioned, right? They always look at the spouse. They always want to rule them out first. She was read her Miranda rights, and she said that she wanted to continue the interview. And throughout the course of the interrogation, she was really easygoing about all of it. When asked if there was anyone who could have possibly been involved or had some sort of issue with Rob, Sabrina said absolutely not, that Rob didn't have any enemies. And being that Sabrina didn't really have anything to make her guilty, she was now free to leave. 2 weeks after Rob was killed, Jonathan came over to Sabrina's house with an enormous bouquet of flowers. The same kind of flowers that Sabrina had in her wedding bouquet with Rob back in 2000. He also gave her a note. And when he left, Sabrina called Kelly gushing about what Jonathan did, saying that in the note he talked about how good of a man Rob was and how he wanted to be that kind of man, and just how it was a very moving note and gesture. But Kelly thought that the whole thing was weird, because Rob had just been murdered at that point, and Jonathan now wasn't wasting any time just kind of slipping right into his place, slithering right into his place. And that's just it. He didn't wait. And he continued coming over. Sometimes he would bring family members with him, so things didn't seem too suspicious about it. He even brought his younger sister Emily, and Emily and Sabrina got pretty close. Now, I guess at that point, Jonathan and Sabrina felt like they finally had the freedom that they wanted all along, so that they could now be together. But we know that nothing is that easy. Kelly had told her husband Jason about that note and the flowers, and then Jason called Sheriff Robert Meyer and sent over some text messages to him that he had recently received from Jonathan, some messages that felt a little off to him. Jonathan had texted Jason saying that he was sorry for the affair that he and Sabrina had, which is really odd that he felt the need to tell Jason that, but either way, Sheriff Meyer was pretty shocked about it, and he was pretty shocked about what he heard. So then he went to Sabrina to talk to her, keeping what Jason had told him to himself. And instead of bringing up what Jason had told him, he instead asked Sabrina about her marriage to Rob. And Sabrina said that everything had been perfect, which, as we know, her marriage was far from perfect. But maybe she was just trying to keep Rob's dignity intact and, more importantly, keep her kids from getting even more hurt. But either way, Sheriff Meyer executed a search warrant on Jonathan's phone. And he found that between April 2014 to September 1st, 2014, there were over 7,000 text messages and phone calls that he had shared with one number. So Sheriff Meyer put in another search warrant for the phone number to see who Jonathan was so heavily communicating with. But the phone number came back with no name attached to it, which meant that Jonathan had been texting someone who was using a burner phone, which is one of those pay-as-you-go phones. It's usually wrapped in plastic. You can get it at like a gas station. And then, of course, upon further investigation, Sheriff Meyer figured out that that phone belonged to Sabrina. So all of that to be said, both Sabrina and Jonathan were now considered suspects. There was a possible motive here. There was a reason that they wanted to get Rob out of the way. So that's when the police wiretapped Sabrina and Jonathan's phones, including that burner phone. And they also started to put surveillance on Sabrina's home. Were they both involved in this? Was one person involved and the other didn't know? What was really going on here? Or were none of them involved? Was this random? So a few weeks after Rob died, Sabrina took to Facebook in a very long tribute-style post for Rob. In this, she says, "Words cannot begin to express my thankful heart. Robert showed his love, compassion, hardworking skills, and genuine kindness to everybody he met. Through this pain and unbelievable tragedy, Rob's love continues on. The love and kindness given back to me and our kids has been overwhelming. We thank you all so much for acts of random kindness that have been shown to us. Flowers, gifts, hugs, food. All of the love that has come to us has been such a beautiful tribute to the amazing man that Robert was and will never be forgotten. As I express my gratitude, I become more deeply aware of it, and I feel the need to express it. The key to happiness in life is love and being loved. God blessed us with Rob for the time he did, and the love he gave was more than some ever will feel or show. I will never let Rob's love die or fade out. I will carry it with me wherever I go, and I will remind our children of it daily as they grow. It is better to give and receive." Acts 20:35. We received something wonderful from Rob's life, and the effects are truly overwhelming. It's a feeling of joy, yet I'm totally numb to the fact that I'm left on earth now without him. I look towards God and the beautiful sky he painted with colors that fill my heart with hope to see Rob again someday. So with this, Sabrina appeared to be the picture of a grieving widow. But weirdly enough, not long after Rob's death, Jonathan attempted to not just step into Sabrina's life, but Robbie and Leanna's life as well, almost in like a fatherly role, which was way too soon. He would start taking them to the beach, he would take them on hikes, and eventually he started trying to punish them when they did something wrong. Mind you, this was all happening only like a month or two after their dad was just murdered. I mean, I just can't imagine how Robbie and Leanna were feeling about that, because their dad was shot to death, and police didn't know who did it. And now all of a sudden, some strange man was like hanging out, was lingering, was taking them on these like adventures, and taking their mom out, and trying to take their dad's place. That would be a lot for anybody, but truly unimaginable for an 8 and 11-year-old. On top of all of that, Sabrina randomly cut Rob's family out of her and her kids' life entirely. She wouldn't let anyone on Rob's side of the family see the kids, which is just beyond cruel, being that Rob's family went through a very tragic and unexpected loss too. And not only was Sabrina acting weird on that issue, but also not long after Rob died, she made a trip to his work at the railroad company to ask about the insurance payout that she was going to receive for Rob's life insurance, which was supposed to be upwards of $300,000. So as the wiretapping, the surveillance, and all of that continued, police tapped into multiple conversations that Jonathan and Sabrina were having on the phone. At one point, Sabrina said to Jonathan on the phone, quote, "There is a purpose for all the things that God has shown us." To which Jonathan replied, "Yes, there sure is, Sabrina." Jonathan even warned Sabrina on the phone that undercover cops were outside her house watching her. Now, one conversation that stood out as being pretty odd was when Jonathan told Sabrina to get out her Bible and read Psalm 38 and 51, which makes reference to how King David had feelings for one of his best soldiers' wives. The wife's name, I think it's pronounced Bathsheba in the Bible. Please don't quote me on that. But at one point in the story, David secretly got Bathsheba pregnant when the husband, the soldier, wasn't home. So David ordered the husband to be murdered in order for him and Bathsheba to be together and to raise their baby. The beginning of Psalm 38 says, quote, "Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. Your arrows have pierced me, and your hand has come down on me. Because of your wrath, there is no health in my body. There is no soundness in my bones because of my sin. My guilt has overwhelmed me like a burden too heavy to bear." And at the beginning of Psalm 51, it says, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion. Blot out my transgressions. Wash away all of it and cleanse me from my sin." Basically, David was feeling pretty guilty about what he did, and he wanted forgiveness from God. And now it sure seemed that Jonathan was feeling that exact same way and asking Sabrina to recite these verses. Very odd, right? So police obviously knew what was going on, or suspected at least what was going on, but they still needed their smoking gun to make an arrest. Then in another tapped call in November, just 3 months after Rob's murder, Jonathan said to Sabrina, "David is a lot like you and I. He made a lot of mistakes, and he was someone who committed adultery and then went on to kill the guy. He went out of his way to cover up his sin." So things were really heating up, and now it was beyond evident that either one or both of them was involved in Rob's murder. Police searched Jonathan's house and found pretty damning evidence too. They found black gloves, a red bandana, and a motorcycle helmet, all of which were seen on that surveillance footage from the gas station near where Rob worked around the time of his murder. Now, police also found out that Jonathan owned guns that were similar to the type of gun that was used to shoot Rob to death. So between everything they found in Jonathan's apartment, the conversations that were tapped into, and Sabrina acting a bit too eager for Rob's life insurance policy and for that check to come through, police felt like they had enough evidence to make not just one arrest, but 2. So on November 18th, 2014, both Jonathan and Sabrina were arrested. Jonathan was taken into custody while he was at work at the fire station, and Sabrina was taken in on her way to a parent-teacher conference. But the thing was, shortly after Sabrina was arrested, she was actually let go because police didn't really have that much on her that made her guilty for murdering Rob. She claimed she had no idea what was going on and she had no motive to kill her husband. But the police did have enough for Jonathan. I mean, on top of those strange calls that he made, the only vehicle that wasn't able to be identified right away from the surveillance footage from that night of the murder was a motorcycle, which ended up being his. So Jonathan was sent to jail awaiting his trial, which was supposed to happen in January of 2017. I couldn't find a ton of verified information about what Sabrina did for those 2 years before Jonathan's trial. However, it was rumored that she acted pretty carefree, and that she even got back in touch with Dale, who, if you remember, she had that emotional affair with while she was with Rob when they had first opened up their marriage, the one that Rob wasn't happy about. Well, apparently he and his wife Nicole did end up getting divorced, and then he and Sabrina got back in touch after Rob died, and the two of them started hanging out. They would go out to lunch with her kids, and the rumor around town was that Jonathan got wind of all of it, which actually might make sense, because on January 9th, 2017, just 2 days before his trial was set to begin, a crazy twist of events happened. Jonathan decided to take a plea deal for a shortened sentence, instead of possible life in prison, all with the contingency that he testified against Sabrina. A few days before this happened, he had told authorities about Sabrina's involvement in Rob's murder, and the police ended up arresting her on Friday, January 6th, 2017, and they charged her with conspiracy to commit murder. So it would make sense that he got jealous and got upset that she wasn't sticking by his side and that she was now pursuing something with Dale, so then he decided to rat her out for her involvement. And either way, Sabrina was placed into a central receiving facility on a $3 million bail, and she stayed there until her trial began on September 11th, 2017. The jury for Sabrina's trial consisted of 9 women and 3 men. The prosecution team went first with opening statements, and prosecutor Eric Smith told the jury about how Jonathan was the one who pulled the trigger killing Rob, but that Sabrina was heavily involved in the planning of it. He claimed that a big reason that Sabrina wanted to do it was for that $300,000 life insurance payment, and that payment was apparently supposed to be even more since Rob was killed on the job. He also let the jury in on how bizarre Sabrina was acting so shortly after her husband had been murdered, and at that point she was supposed to have no idea who even did it.
Now, while the investigation was going on, because Robert was killed in August, the investigation took September, October, November before an arrest actually happened. Sabrina and Jonathan actually basically started a new life together. Jonathan Hearn would go over to her residence in Hellendale. Usually he would bring a family member in tow, just so it didn't look out of the ordinary. He would also come and stay the night. She would call him. He would go there late at night. After the kids were in bed, he would stay till the morning and he would leave. Evidence will show some of the text messaging that went back and forth between Sabrina Limon and Jonathan Hearn in this time frame. September 5th, 2014, this is 19 days after Robert had been killed. Sabrina sent the text message, "Oh, how I love you," saying September 5th, "I adore you, Jonathan Hearn, you sexy guy." September 7th, 21 days after Robert had been killed. I want to kiss you right now and not stop. Another text message that same day. Ah, my poor guy. I love you so much, baby. Miss you so much tonight. I feel God's purpose and strength working in my life and in our relationship. I love you, Jonathan. 25 days after Robert was killed on, basically 3 years ago today, September 11, 2014. You are so good to me. We can only get better with God. That is so exciting. As so many look to others' lives and other things, we look to God. There is no greater peace to find. I feel super blessed. Again, this is 25 days after her husband had been shot and killed in Tehachapi.
Next up was Sabrina's defense attorney, Richard Terry, who painted a very different picture of Sabrina. Instead of her being some evil mastermind, he claimed that she was actually the victim. He told the jury in his opening statement that there was no denying that Sabrina had a physical and emotional relationship with Jonathan, but that is where it ended. He claimed that she was taken advantage of by Jonathan, referring to her as a high school dropout who wasn't receiving attention from her own husband and depended on Jonathan for this attention. And so essentially, Jonathan, someone who was considered highly intelligent by people who knew him, then preyed on Sabrina.
But he was highly intelligent, and he manipulated Sabrina Limon. And he decided, he knew Sabrina was never going to divorce Robert, but he had to have her. She had to be his. And in his mind, the only way to get that, to have her, was to get rid of Robert. She would never leave Robert, because ultimately she loved her husband. She loved the father of her children. She loved her life. Jonathan filled some need in her to be wanted only for herself. But that doesn't mean she didn't love her husband.
Sabrina's trial had around 30 different witnesses testify. From Dale to Jonathan's parents, the list was actually pretty extensive. Even Jonathan's mother, dad, and sister all testified. His sister Emily talked about how Jonathan was a kind person, but that everyone is capable of things that you don't think that they're capable of. But the absolute star of the trial was Jonathan himself. And when it was time for him to testify against Sabrina, that's when things got really interesting, because he did not hold back. He discussed how the two of them fell in love and how they had a very deep connection. The prosecution team specifically brought up Valentine's Day in 2014 because that was the time that things seemed to take on a more sinister direction in their secret relationship, because they had discussed on Valentine's Day about having a future together. Remember, it included marriage. And when Jonathan was asked if that future involved Robert dying, Jonathan said yes. So he was then asked what ways were discussed to kill Rob, to eliminate Rob from the picture.
Yes, I did.
Okay. What was the initial method that you decided upon?
Poisoning.
Okay. Did you have any other methods in mind?
Briefly considered some others, yes, but...
And when you came up with these methods, was this by yourself or in conjunction with Miss Limon?
in conjunction with Sabrina.
How do these conversations go?
As far as planning the poisoning, or are you saying to progress to getting to poisoning him?
The initial decision as to what method you would use to try to kill Robert.
I don't remember how the conversation was came up, but obviously we were discussing killing him, and I know we briefly discussed. She asked me how I thought would be best, and we discussed, I believe, car accident and fire, and quickly skipped over those and arrived at poisoning, and then did a significant amount of discussion and planning pursuant to that.
Let's start with car accident. How long did you and Miss Limon dwell on that as a possibility?
It is so crazy to me that those were the options being discussed and not divorce. And when asked about what Sabrina contributed to the conversation, Jonathan said that she actually helped quite a bit in forming the plan.
A lot of things, including but not limited to, she did express that, well, to back up, she told me that he had had a little bit of, he had had a kind of a rare medical condition. The name of it escapes me right now, but he had had a rare medical condition that had presented with some symptoms that might be mimicked in a poisoning attempt. And so she told me about his medical history pretty extensively and how he had gone to a specialty hospital for this in our area. And she also mentioned that even recently he'd been having some stomach issues, and since we knew that poisoning would present with those flu-like almost symptoms, nausea, vomiting, bowel irregularities, stuff like that, she mentioned that he had been having some of those symptoms recently, and that was a good thing as far as masking the expected symptoms. And then she did mention that regarding those symptoms, she had mentioned some of those to some of their friends as well, so that maybe they would be less alarmed, or they would be less suspicious when he eventually died of those symptoms. But then her involvement also included a number of other things. Obviously, I needed to know what kind of food he would be sure to eat. She provided me a couple suggestions. We discussed the location where they should take place. We agreed upon Tehachapi to send him some food laced with poison. And there was a couple of ideas behind Tehachapi. One, the level of the emergency care there was probably not up to par with some of the metro areas or some of the hospitals in our area. And then also just that he would be working alone there, so there wouldn't be the likelihood of someone else eating the same thing he was eating, or that he wouldn't share with them. So she expressed all these things as well as some others.
Do you recall the others?
Not at this moment.
How sick is that? Sabrina was so calculated that she thought about how she could use Rob's health issues as a way to secretly get away with his murder, even going as far as to tell their friends about how he had not been feeling well lately, so that they wouldn't catch on to things. He claimed that they decided to go the poisoning route, and so Jonathan then went and purchased arsenic. And in order to stay under the radar, he used a prepaid credit card to purchase arsenic trioxide, which is something that can be used to treat leukemia, and it can also cause a ton of serious and life-threatening issues, including death. Now, purchasing something like arsenic online isn't exactly easy, and everywhere that Jonathan was finding online that sold it did require background checks, which he obviously wanted to avoid. He was able to finally find a place that sold it without any background checks, so he had it delivered to his grandparents' art studio. And apparently he didn't care about putting his loved ones in any harm's way or animals in any harm's way. Jonathan didn't want Rob to be the one who was tested first, and he wanted to make sure that when he poisoned Rob that it worked. So he found a test subject to practice on.
With the arsenic I had purchased, but eventually, just because I still worked and had a busy life that I was carrying on, so I do remember on one of the days when I had some free time and was off, I examined the product, also tested the dosing, well, I don't want to say suggested dosing because no one suggests it, but what I believe to be the toxic loading dose of arsenic, and it's a dose by weight ratio, and so I experimented with that on a neighbor dog who had caused me considerable issues in the past, and put it on some meat and put the arsenic, that is, on some meat and gave it to the dog to see what would happen. After that time, and I want to say it was within a few days after that, was when I actually prepared then a batch for Robert, knowing that he was going to be going up to work in Tehachapi because Sabrina had let me know his shift schedule.
Yes, Jonathan literally poisoned a dog who was annoying him, which, how heinous is that? I feel like anyone who might have thought that he was swayed by Sabrina and blinded by love and that that's what led him to kill probably changed their minds after hearing how he poisoned somebody's pet. Anyway, Jonathan said that Sabrina gave him a list of food ideas that Rob liked that could work, and he settled on banana pudding. The two of them even went as far as to discuss where Rob should ingest the pudding. They figured having it happen at work when he would be the only one there might be best, so that no one else might accidentally be poisoned. They also thought it would be best for it to happen at work because they believed that the healthcare system out there wasn't as good as the one that was in their town, and they didn't want any chance of Rob making a recovery. So Jonathan said that he made the batch of pudding and then placed the laced serving in a separate container, but delivered both batches to Sabrina, so that nothing would look suspicious in her fridge. Basically, so Rob didn't ask why there was one random serving of homemade banana pudding in the fridge. Sabrina then apparently sent Rob off with the pudding to work that day. But after he left, Sabrina began talking about what if they got caught, and how easy it would be for the police to trace their phones. So they called off the pudding plan and got a burner phone instead so that they couldn't be traced. Sabrina called Rob at work to let him know that the pudding had gone bad and that he needed to toss it. So early on the day that Rob was shot to death, Jonathan left work and he headed to Walmart to buy ammo. On his way home, he put reflectors on his motorcycle so that it made it look different than what it typically looked like, so that nobody would suspect that it was his motorcycle. He packed up 2 backpacks, an old man mask to disguise himself, and he dressed in baggy clothing. In addition to all of that preparation, he made a silencer out of the barrel of a flashlight. But when Jonathan arrived at Rob's workplace that evening, he couldn't find Rob. He actually thought about backing out of the plan altogether, but then he saw Rob appear. So Jonathan took about 10 minutes or so to psych himself up to follow through with everything. Then he decided to go up and to talk to Rob and skip out on the whole mask thing. Wasn't going to wear the mask. Apparently the two of them had a quick conversation, and at one point Rob turned around with his back facing Jonathan, and that is when he shot him. Rob was the only one there at work, and on top of that, the makeshift silencer that Jonathan made was so quiet that the chances of anyone hearing him anyway were pretty slim. Jonathan then headed home, and he saw that he had a ton of missed calls from Sabrina. So he called her and he told her that he took care of things. Jonathan discussed how when he would bring up the idea of divorce with Sabrina, she was very, very against it because she thought that it would ruin her image. She didn't want to have to deal with the custody arrangements, and she felt that Rob would rather be dead than divorced. So on day 13 of the trial, it was Sabrina's turn to take the stand. She discussed how she and Rob first met, how she was a high school dropout, and overall how her life was pretty great up until 2008, when they decided to open up their marriage. When asked about why she engaged in a relationship with Jonathan, she made it very clear that he pursued her, and she almost seemed to be getting very defensive about the question.
Well, I'll come back to this a little bit, but why did you become involved with Jonathan in initially an emotional or extramarital affair? Why did you do that? Why did you become involved with him?
There's no right answer to say to that. I don't know. The attention that he pursued on me, the attention he showed me was very different than anything I'd ever, or that I guess I should say what I was getting at that moment in that time in my life. I don't know why I pursued a relationship with him.
Was there something about your relationship with Jonathan that you felt you needed?
apparently there was. And at that time, it became our sacred relationship. And I guess that's, now looking at it, what I was lacking in my life, in my marriage.
Sabrina went on to discuss how Jonathan had been very controlling and manipulative, and that it was pretty much him who wanted to keep things private. She said, quote, "He told me the dangers of what can happen when an affair is exposed, how the police think, and how they work." She said that she was completely shocked when she found out that it was Jonathan who murdered her husband, because at the time of the murder, he was her rock when she was going through all of the turmoil. Next up, it was time for Sabrina's cross-examination, and the prosecutor did not take any mercy on Sabrina. All along, she had acted like she was the victim and that Jonathan was the one who was heavily pursuing her and controlling everything she did. But Eric brought up the explicit images that she would send him.
I've heard a lot of testimony from you about how you were controlled by Jonathan Hearn, but you were sending him explicit photographs of yourself on a regular basis. Is that fair?
A regular basis? I don't remember that, but yes, that is fair.
Okay. So why were you sending him these photos?
Well, he'd asked me for those photos.
So every time you sent an explicit photo, Jonathan Hearn has said to you, "Hey, Sabrina, send me something with you naked."
I don't remember that, no.
So when you sent some of these photos, you sent it on your own volition, on your own.
I'm sure I did, yes.
He also brought up how not only would she send him the photos, but also love notes, saying how much she loved him and how much she appreciated him. And each time the prosecutor would bring up this evidence, he asked Sabrina how that was Jonathan controlling her. And she would sort of stumble on her words, and then at one point said, "I guess I have no physical evidence." Truthfully, Sabrina's cross-examination went on for hours, and it was pretty much a train wreck from start to finish. So many of her responses were, I don't know, I don't remember, and many believed her testimony was what actually shot her in the foot in the end. She just seemed stumped for hours for a good bit of it, and would oftentimes just shake her head looking up at the ceiling. So case in point when the prosecutor asked her about when police gave her a description of who was seen on the surveillance footage, and the possible suspect who ended up being Jonathan.
That could be, I don't know what, I didn't know what was happening at that point. I didn't know what to think.
Detective Meyer asked you, "Can you think of any direction we should be going on this?" This is after the description. You responded, "No."
I was definitely convinced that continuing to conceal Jonathan Hearn as my lover was where my mind was at that time.
Okay. When you made this call to Jonathan Hearn after the description was provided by Detective Meyer, why did you call his station?
Both of Sabrina's kids were called to testify, but luckily they were only ushered in to be interviewed and then they left. They were never cross-examined or subjected to hearing the details of the case. At that point, they really thought for 2 years that their mom was innocent in all of this. Plus, they were both pretty young. Leanna was 11 and Robbie was 14, so there was no need to get them heavily involved in the trial. They had already been through so much already. Leanna went on the stand and said that she really didn't know Jonathan well, but that she loved her mom. And Robbie said that Jonathan tried to act like their dad and would attempt to discipline them as well. So finally, on October 4th, 2017, after deliberating for around 5 hours, the jury came back with a verdict.
The people of the state of California, plaintiff versus Sabrina Limon, defendant. Case number BF 166801A. Verdict in Bakersfield, California on October 4th, 2017. First count. We, the jury and panel to try the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Sabrina Limon, guilty of a felony to wit, murder of Robert Limon in violation of Section 187, Sub A of the Penal Code, as charged in the first count of the information, and do hereby fix the degree as murder in the first degree. Signed by the foreperson.
Sabrina was found guilty for 4 out of the 6 charges. The jury didn't find it to be true that Jonathan ever delivered arsenic-laced pudding to Sabrina or that she put the banana pudding in Rob's lunchbox, but everything else they did find to be true. Sabrina was found guilty of murder, conspiring to commit a crime, and soliciting to commit murder and accessory. While Sabrina's sentencing trial was slated to happen the following month on November 3rd, it got pushed back due to Sabrina wanting a retrial. She felt that her trial attorney, Richard Terry, failed to prepare her for the questions that she was going to get asked on the stand. However, Kern County Superior Court Judge John R. Brownlee denied Sabrina a retrial on February 21st, 2018. Heartbreakingly enough, Sabrina's children wrote letters to the judge, pleading for him to reconsider. Robbie said, "My mom is one of the best people I know. She's loving and loves God. She loved my dad, and we do everything together. I need my mom in my life. I would do anything to get her home. Please help me make that happen." The judge felt bad about the children and felt bad about this, but he upheld Sabrina's guilty ruling, and he sentenced her to 25 years to life in prison. The judge could feel the tension in the courtroom between Rob and Sabrina's family and truly did feel for Robbie and Leanna. So he spoke directly to Rob and Sabrina's family, saying their worlds changed when their father was murdered, and now their mother will be sentenced and incarcerated for her actions. Don't continue to make the children victims. Both families need to set aside their differences and focus on the health and well-being of the children. It is imperative that you come together. Turn your anger toward each other to love and guide these 2 children. But unfortunately, his heartfelt plea didn't do any good. Rob's family and friends went out the exit together, and Sabrina's family and friends gathered together on the steps of the courthouse. After Sabrina's trial ended, Jonathan had his sentencing hearing on November 16, 2017, during which one of Rob's sisters spoke directly to Jonathan, saying that she forgave him and that the last few years had been a roller coaster of emotions, but that him being so forthcoming with the truth helped, and that she felt that justice had been served. Jonathan also directly spoke to Rob's family, to Sabrina, and to her children, apologizing for what he had done.
I have evoked God's name and yet behaved exactly opposite of his dictates. I have sinned. I am aware that for my crimes, anything short of death is really merciful. Yet for my sin, I truly do deserve much worse. I have wept and struggled searching for adequate words to express my repentance. It seems like saying I'm sorry to you all will never be enough. And so speaking on borrowed and undeserved breath, I offer you my broken-hearted and genuine apology, knowing that it cannot compare to the grief that I've caused all of you.
Rob's family was okay with his plea deal and the shortened sentence due to him telling the truth. Not to mention, his plea deal was ultimately what led to Sabrina getting her guilty verdict. So today, Jonathan is serving his sentence at Ironwood State Prison in Blythe, California. Originally, he was supposed to serve 25 years and 4 months in prison, but due to his plea bargain, he was given a reduced sentence, and he was required to serve 85% of his original sentence. And being that at that point he had already served 3 years of his sentence, in 2017 he was down to 18 more years. So he was expected to be a free man by the end of 2035, making him 45 years old. However, because of the age he was when he committed the murder, he is eligible for youth offender parole, meaning that after 14 years served, he is eligible for parole, which will be in November of 2028. Youth parole is pretty much the same as the typical parole that you hear about, but with youth, age is a big factor, and people 24 years old or younger are allowed to be in that program, and they are considered youth. So that factors heavily into things. In fact, some of the information given to inmates eligible for the program says that the fact that you were young at the time of the crime should count as a reason in favor of granting you parole. And from the sounds of it, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he was granted parole. He apparently is thriving in prison and is a well-behaved and well-rounded inmate. He takes classes and he attends programs that the prison offers, and he even leads a Bible study for his fellow inmates. Sabrina is serving her 26-year and 4-month sentence and possible life sentence in Corona, California. She tried to appeal her sentencing, but the appeal court denied her appeal. Her attorneys felt that because of the media attention that the jury should have been sequestered and that there was too much media attention around it, and not only that, but they also believed that none of what Jonathan was saying on the stand was verified. Now, I couldn't really find any information that gave insight as to whether or not Sabrina is thriving in prison like Jonathan is. After Sabrina was arrested, both of her children were taken in by Sabrina's sister, Julie, and today they are both young adults and seem to be doing pretty well, at least via social media. It's rumored that they still are on their mother's side and that they are not in touch with their dad's family, but I couldn't find a confirmation on that, being that they understandably prefer to stay out of the limelight, so that is not concrete. 40 to 50% of marriages do end in divorce, and I'm not saying that I am a huge advocate of divorce, but let's be honest, for this case, that would have definitely been the best option all the way around. I'm honestly shocked that things got the way they did and that divorce wasn't ever really talked about, at least not seriously. Why in the world would arsenic poisoning, a car accident, fire, and ultimately a shooting come before simply filing for divorce? Make it make sense. Like I said, just get a divorce. That's my new slogan. Just get a divorce. Instead of doing that, Robert's life was tragically cut short, and Robbie and Leanna essentially lost both of their parents, and their lives were forever changed. But I guess I want to know what you guys think, because there are so many people who disagree on this case. Was Jonathan just obsessed with Sabrina and had to have her all to himself? Or was Sabrina sick of Rob not giving her the attention that she wanted? So she went on this plan with Jonathan to kill her husband and then start this new happy life together. Who was really responsible, or was this a joint effort? Because like I said, this case is pretty divided. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of 10 to Life. Don't forget, if you want to stay up to date with new episodes as I post them, hit that subscribe button. It's totally free. It just will notify you when you log into YouTube next time if I posted a new video. All right, thanks again, and until the next one, stay safe.